Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. My guest today is Katy Moran. Katy is the EMEA regional lead for personal care at Kimberly-Clark. Katy started her career in advertising as a planner, and then transitioned into a client-side role of Kimberly-Clark. And I'd say over the past 8 years, and Katy will correct me if I got the numbers wrong, but over the past 8 years, I've watched Katy take on increasing levels of responsibility, and ultimately she transitioned out of a capability role and into a GM P&L management role with substantial scope and scale. And while this is an impressive journey, and I'm sure it was challenging in all the traditional sense, that wasn't the hard part of the journey, and that's what we're here to talk about. The biggest and most challenging transition that Katy's had to make, and one many, if not most women have to struggle to make, is that of managing a high-profile, demanding career and being a mother. And it's the "and" part that we're going to talk about. And in my many years of working and knowing Katy, I've come to experience secondhand the challenges and tensions and absurdities, which we'll get into, and the stress associated with trying to juggle these two seemingly binary commitments, or, as we'll talk about later, making the wrong kinds of trade-offs, or the sort of stereotypical kinds of trade-offs. Katy's made the adjustments, sometimes unnecessarily, and now more recently is vocally advocating for the changes necessary to make this less painful and less absurd as other people work through this journey. I can try better understand and empathize and actively support, but I'm smart enough to know, I've been trained by you, that I'll never fully know what it's like to be in your shoes. I'm a man. So I've asked Katy to come onto the podcast, share her journey, talk as we normally do, talk very directly and frankly about what she's done, and importantly, what leaders can do to make life a little bit better. So I'm Clive Serkin. Let's get unstuck. Welcome, my friend Katy. Always good to have you.
Hi, Clive. Thank you for the humbling introduction. So I always love to sit back and have people talk about me. It's always that unnerving feeling, but
Right.
thank you for that kind introduction that you
Well,
just gave me.
when I get introduced, when I speak in an event or something, and I hear the introduction, I go like, my mother wrote
Yeah,
that.
right.
There are
Or
some.
I think sometimes I wish my mom could hear that. She would be so proud, you know. So yes, no, it's so nice and it's so great to be talking to you. So,
Pleasure.
yeah,
Listen, we've talked about this topic before, and
yep.
I vividly remember the one phone call I had. You were heading. It was an evening in London. You were heading to a leadership team meeting, and you were really passionate about this topic. And I was like, I got to get you on to talk about it, because a big part of this podcast is cutting through the bullshit and the made for TV kind of rhetoric and getting real.
Yep.
And you've lived through this, and it's not been an easy journey, and yet you come out the other side almost intact.
Almost is the key word. It depends on the day, but yes. Yeah.
Almost intact. But the key here, and I think it's important. I was thinking about this conversation this morning over coffee. It's like we're really talking to two people here, two sort of
Yep.
constituents. One is, and importantly, women like you who are going through a similar
Yep.
journey, pulling their hair out. And I've had this amazing experiences just saying some like obvious stuff to you has a profound impact. And I had a similar experience. I was having dinner one night with a leadership team, and I just mentioned casually that I'm an undiagnosed dyslexic, thanks to you, because you diagnosed me. And I just said it. I just said it casually because it is what it is. And one of the leaders who's just absolute superstar, it's had such a profound effect on her because she was trying to hide it. I'm like, why on earth? So women is the main constituent, but men need to understand, because oftentimes men as leaders don't understand the impact that they have, both negatively and positively. And I know you talked about some of the experiences you have and who you work for now. So
Yeah.
But before we get into the meat of it, like just walk everyone through your journey because it's an interesting journey, and it
Yeah.
didn't start with four boys. I mean,
No, it didn't start
three
with,
little ones.
4 boys, including the husband, but,
Yeah.
no, it started, uh, yeah, no, when I think about it, and it's interesting because people ask me a lot about kind of my journey, and I think ironically, Clive, it's a little unconventional. So I started out as a single woman in advertising in New York City, and I loved what I did, and so I it was my life. And again, a lot of people, I remember kind of working in advertising. I worked in advertising in New York. We then moved to Colorado, had kind of a dream life, my husband and I, once we were married, of skiing on the weekends in Vail, but then living in New York, working on a brilliant account of Kimberly-Clark. I mean, I was, and people would say, like, what are your biggest passions? And this is going to sound crazy to people, but like, I think work was my biggest passion. Like, and it wasn't that I felt like, I have to work. I loved working. And so it was kind of everything to me in a weird way, but I was very happy. It wasn't like I was, working like crazy amounts of hours, because as because I was working with you at the time, traveling the world, taking on really challenging topics, working with, I still work with my partners in South Korea, and like teaching marketing capabilities to South Koreans, and then being in Brazil and Australia and all over, spending years in Russia. Like, when you think about all of that, it was an unbelievable experience. So I was a complete workaholic, is the reality. But I loved it. I loved the people I worked with. I loved the work I was doing, all of that kind of thing. Um, and I loved working in advertising, but I did get to a point, and I will remember the conversations you and I had of kind of, I had been working on Kimberly-Clark for about 5 years, and again, before that, I worked on lots of different brands, but I think this was kind of the pivotal time in my career. And I said, I think it's probably time for me to move on to the next thing. And you said to me, well, would that ever be interested? Would you ever be interested in kind of that thing being like moving over to the client side and being at Kimberly-Clark? And again, I am always thankful to you for that opportunity. But one of the, you might have been crazy, but hey, it worked. So I came over to Kimberly-Clark. I started working in kind of marketing capability. I loved it. We worked on kind of how do you build the integrated marketing process that I think is the kind of foundation of marketing at Kimberly-Clark today. And then I got to work on the client. I got to work more on the brand sides and working more with the baby and childcare business in AFC. And so that was all amazing. And again, I continued this unbelievable trajectory of my career. And then I had this thing happen that totally screwed it all up. I had a baby. And it's so interesting because I remember seeing women have babies around me, and I also remember thinking, this is great. I'm pregnant. I'm going to go have this baby, and then 3 months later I'm going to come back and just go right back to working the way that I've always worked. And the reality is that was so far from what was going to happen in my life. And again, I think about it now, and we'll talk about this, but just the whole concept of, you're going to have your entire life turned upside down, by the way, in the best way
Right.
possible. I can't, you can never explain to somebody what it's like. I mean, it is by far the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I love my husband, Brian, very much, but there's just no comparison in the world. And so you have this unbelievable miracle of having this child. And then 3 months later, when you basically can say your name fully, you're thrown back in the workforce. And again, my son had sick, I guess I can just say this, but ended up being diagnosed with epilepsy at 3 months. The first day I went back to work, he had a seizure, and
I
I
remember.
went to work 4 days later. Like, you think about the things that you do because you're like in a machine mode of like, this is what society tells me I'm supposed to do. What I'm defined by is working. So I just went right back to work. Um, I think about that in a sad way now, as like kind of a dark time in a weird way. And I think I was probably angry at the fact that I had to be going back to work, but I knew I wanted to continue my career, but I was really conflicted. And then I think honestly, which I'm grateful for because I love this, but 15 months later I had another baby because I was like, I want another one of these because I love these little beings this much, and I need another break because I need to be home with my babies, you know? So I don't think the strategy of just having children over and over again to being able to have 3 months of maternity leave is probably not the right long-term strategy for people. But I just I could see very quickly that no longer was I just defined by work, but I was actually more of a mom than a workaholic at that point. Um, and I loved it. But then I also was saying like, okay, work wise, if I am going to work? What would be an interesting adventure for my little kids and my husband and everything? And then all of a sudden, this unbelievable opportunity came to me of moving to EMEA and overseeing what at the time was the adult and feminine care business, which I was really close to the Kotex brand. I loved the work we were doing. So I don't know if that was another insane decision, but we moved to London um, with our 15-month-old, our 2-year old, and my husband and I. And then just to add, I guess, fuel to the fire, COVID happened. So then all of a sudden I had a new job. I kind of took on a BCC, or our baby and childcare business at that time as well. My husband and I, our nanny couldn't come anymore. So, you just think about like all of the things that are happening. You're far away. You're trying to be a good daughter to your parents as you're going through this crisis, but you're kind of really far away from them. I was full time caring for the kids. With Brian and I were splitting that, and trying to deliver in this leadership role. And I think we'll talk about kind of it, but I think that was probably a little bit of a breaking point where I had this reflection of I was trying to be Katy at work. That was Katy at work before I had children, and the mom that I really wanted to be. And being able to be, again, a self-proclaimed workaholic and a really good mom, the mom I wanted to be, um, it is a recipe for failure, is what I would say in life. I think I don't know if I was failing at my job or being a mom. I don't even know, but like from a mental health perspective, probably not the best thing for
Right.
anyone. So
So, wait, so then, and
yeah,
then you did the
yeah.
most logical thing anyone could do.
I had another baby.
There you go.
Because that's what fixes everything. But I do honestly. So COVID, yeah, all of these things, and then I got pregnant, and I actually though Clive, and I know we'll talk. But I say to Miles is the one that saved me, and I genuinely think he did, and the reason why, and then I will stop on my monologue, is because it was a breaking point of where you realize you can't do everything. And so then you
Well,
have to relook at it. And again, I want to talk about it over this time we have together. But I actually now think I am doing everything. I'm just doing it in a much healthier way. And so that was the turning point to me is baby number 3, my little man Miles. I still say thank you to him because he changed it for me. And now I am happy. So I guess that's the ending, but here we'll go through it.
no,
Yes.
so but that I think you answered the question that I wanted to get to. It's like, you and Brian build this wonderful family. You take on more and more responsibility. You move internationally. You have your third son, um, and so it wasn't a. It sounds like it was both a gradual sort of burn and then an oh shit moment that said, "Oh, it's some like listen, the math just doesn't work." Okay,
There are actually not enough hours in the day. Like,
right. It just
so yeah.
it just mathematically doesn't work. And so now you have this realization, okay? Um, talk about and you said something in there which I think is sort of the theme of everything and I've tried to talk to as many women I've worked with or know who've gone through the
Yeah.
same or similar situation. And it's kind of like this realization that it's not trying to do what you do better, it's do something different. I think
Yeah.
you said something to that effect, right? And
And
and and just to be clear, and I think it's really important, it's not like you come back after your third maternity leave, which is, now and we should talk about it, a
yeah.
different kind of maternity leave being in Europe, but it's not like you took your foot off the gas, okay? That because I think that's important. It's like sometimes many of the women I've talked to have said it's sort of I feel like I have a choice, which is either be like a power career person and a shitty mom, or take a B track career wise and be a better mom. And it's false choice. I think you're going to talk about it. It's like you went back after mat leave, um, and took on an additional sector, right? That was
Yep.
growing, ridiculous growth, and you had Huggies, which had like passed the $1 billion mark, if I remember correct. So it's like this is not going back to you know, an easy roll. This is go back and foot on the pedal. So how does we talked about math? That doesn't seem like the math works.
It doesn't seem like the math works. So let me try to say a few things that I before when I was trying to create this reality of post children Katie and after children Katie, post children Katie and be the mom. One of the things that I realized was actually an energy sucker is what I'm going to call it, was I had this impression um, that if I talked about my children and I talked about the reality of being a mom, I somehow was then seemingly less committed at work. And so I think about it as I was constantly working to minimize the impact of my children at work. So if I really wanted to pick them up one day from school, I would, I wouldn't tell anybody, but I'd be flying home in the car to try to get them to pick them up so that I was there because, when you have a child that looks at you and says, Mom, why do all the other moms pick them up from school, their kids up from school, but you don't? Your heart actually starts to break into pieces. And so you go, don't worry, Hayden, I will be there tomorrow to get you from school. But you look at your calendar and you go, well, how the heck am I actually going to do this? And so what I started to do is tell people that of saying, my son is really upset that I'm not picking him up from school. So I'm really sorry, but tomorrow I have to move this meeting because I need to go to that. And I hope that if you have this situation with your kids, you do the same thing. So I started to say, like, I'm gonna become the person I want to be and ask for forgiveness from people that I might have to move things around. But you know what? Everyone started saying
Right.
thank you because that's what they wanted to be able to do. So all of a sudden my leadership, it was so interesting because we do these kind of pulse surveys to see how people are feeling about their leaders. And everyone started liking working for me more. And I'm going, why do you like working for me more? I'm like, I'm picking my kids up from school. I'm making it a little bit harder from a but people wanted the ability to do that themselves. And again, I'm like, great, that's good. If we can deliver the numbers, let's pick our kids up from school and deliver the numbers. Let's be more involved in their lives and deliver the numbers. And so all of a sudden, me just like kind of pulling down that curtain and exposing myself of I got to take my kid to this doctor's appointment. I have to do this was so helpful to them.
Good. And it's interesting. Um, I run the risk of saying dumb man stuff.
No. Yes.
But it's like it's wild for me because I like when as a dad wanted to go and pick up David and then Kayla as well. It's like, and I would just say things like I never thought that was a thing I couldn't say.
I know.
And so it's like I know like people go like, "What are you, an idiot?" But it's like it just highlights the absurdity of it. It's like for like and my I always had this thing because we used to have like bring your kid to work day at Leo back in the day, and I love that. Even when I always say like you should bring kids into the office, A, because it just gets everything real, and B, it sort of makes everyone sort of get like calm down and just sort of
Mhm.
get a bit of perspective. And COVID happened. And
Yep.
COVID was sort of take your kid to work day.
Exactly. And I honestly, in a weird way, I'm like, I think COVID was a savior in ways because it made people realize that we can work in different ways. And again, I think that, when actually COVID first happened, it was awful for working mothers and working parents in general, honestly. But we do see a disproportionate effect on working women. And but I think the tail effect of it has actually been a very positive one because it shows that you know, you can do things from home. You can work different hours of the day. And again, I genuinely feel that if we could focus more on the output and performance of people versus where and when and the hours they work, that is really an unlock for for working moms, and to be able to do what I really want to do, being a mom and being a, as you would say, kind of high powered, and have these like kind of very demanding jobs that we have.
What and the interesting thing for me is like we are humans working with other humans to establish and to create human outcomes with other humans. Like, see the theme there? And yet
Yes,
somehow there's this unspoken thing that you can't be a human.
right.
Like that being a worker or an executive or a leader somehow
No, I
therefore
mean there
says
was a
subordinate being a human. Like I don't understand. Like it's
no,
this
but I think, I mean,
self-imposed.
look, I
Yeah,
think there was a feeling, and
yeah,
I mean, again, at least there was a perception. So who even knows if it's a reality? But there was a perception of, well, if I had to do all these things as a mom, then I wasn't able to really focus enough on work. And again, I don't think that that's true. I think that and I think we just need to break that, because then people have the ability to do both of those things. So
right,
again, I think this like this feeling of I have to minimize the amount of energy I was spending to minimize the impact
right,
of my children at work was taking too much of my energy. And
right,
honestly, I've said now to my manager, to a bunch of people I work with, when they say, "What is the difference?" I said, "This is the first time in my life, in my career, where I genuinely, truly believe I can be a mom and be successful at work." And so
right,
like letting me be the mom I want to be, the happiness as it brings me, and then it makes me more committed to the job I'm doing.
right.
The irony of all of this is I work on a baby care brand. So I
There,
go,
there.
if I can't do it, then I don't know who can. But I do think, and I really think that it's interesting. I've been speaking, I spoke at a conference recently, and the feedback I got was, it's so refreshing to hear women openly talk about it, which is why I'm here today talking to you, Clive,
Right,
because I just go, well, I hope that other women don't have to go through that,
right,
because it's not really worth it.
right. And just so I'm crystal clear when I was saying my last sort of point, like why, it wasn't like why are you crazy to think that way. I'm going, why
Yep,
as leaders do we like what are we doing wrong to create that environment where people think that's this false choice? Like, so you've answered some of it, which is
yep,
first of all, leaders, men and women, should like, just like talk about it, right? And just
yep,
go, this is very normal. And we're all parents. And yes, as a mom, you have more pressure for all the obvious reasons, but we should just be open and talk about it. And it's okay to want to be a parent and want to be a mom, right? But,
exactly.
but
Yep.
it's not just that. I mean, one of the observations I have just watching Kate and in her career
Hmm.
is sort of the distinction between boundaries and balance.
Yep.
And I think you've mentioned that before.
Yeah, no, like when I first had kids, everyone would talk about having balance in life. And I'm sure that if I went to some sort of yoga retreat, I could get there one day, but I've given up on balance is what I've said. But I have this thing that I've been working on, that I call it kind of boundaries, of saying, so I know the things that I want to do this week. I want to be able to pick up the kids these 3 days. I'm going to, be able to take them to their doctor's appointments, whatever it is that's like important to you, and really identifying those and then making those sacred. And honestly, Clive, I remember back in the day when I was working with you and I was in that workaholic stage, there was a point when you said to me that they were really important meetings, but there was like 3 weeks back to back. And the middle meeting, you said, I'm not going to be away from my kids for 3 weeks straight. So I'm not going to the middle meeting. And I at the time remember thinking, how can you do that? Like how you were told to go to the meeting. And but it's things like that that stick with you. And again, you're looking going, that I can't even remember that meeting,
No,
Katie. But you remember those things, and then you go, oh, he did that, so I should be able to do that, and that's acceptable and it's okay. So I just think that those things um, are really important. And then the final thing that again, from a interesting perspective of boundaries, and when I look back of the, when I call it the dark days of when I first came back from maternity leave, um, with Hayden and Reese, and again, I think back to like the advertising days of the looking at women that had just came back from maternity leave after 3 months. And I have these like vivid memories of opening up the refrigerators in the agencies and having them just filled with breast milk, and going like, this just seems so wrong. That like fundamentally, of all these women we spend half our days like I always like laugh about pumping in closets. But you that is the societal norm in the US. And again, another thing that I say saves me is Miles and Europe, because I came to Europe and they had this different perspective on boundaries, and where they said, once you have a baby, for at least 6 months to, honestly, in Europe, a year, you should be able to spend time with that little being as they develop, and they're like in this critical time when you are actually, for many reasons, interdependent on each other. And so with Miles, I was able to actually take a 6-month maternity leave, and I came back to work feeling so much more kind of ready to work, not resenting work, all of that kind of stuff. So it's just, I do really go, and by the way, it's just asking for those things and then
Sure.
seeing what happens. So I think that's the other probably thing, is that you create the boundaries and then ask, like, this is really what would make a difference in my life and what I want. And all that people can say is no. And so
Right.
that is like, we just have to have the confidence of that.
Well, and I mean, there's a couple of things. One, I remember vividly because I did it a number of times, and I didn't do it to make a point, as in impacting people like you. I loved my work, as you know, and I was all in and passionate and almost to a fault. But I love my family, and the thought of 3 weeks in a row is absurd. And I worked with and around executives who didn't care about that, and I don't judge. I'm just going, for me, I love being on these trips and I love being with my family. And so I just said, listen, I'm not going to do consecutive weeks. It's just not fair. And my perspective was less about what signal I sent to the team, although now I realize how important it is in retrospect. It was more just like, if you don't want me as a leader or an employee in your company because I have that perspective, that's fine, because we've figured something else. We're not meant for each other. And there's other companies that would go, it's cool. Um, and so I wish I would have done more of that. And by the way, I'm still tormented about the closet, because I saw Molly the other day and she used to go into that. It was like a copy room to pump.
It's a
I rem-
closet, a dark, like, broom closet,
I'm
basically.
tormented. Well, and I was determined when we redesigned the office to build a proper room to be more respectful, but I still have tormented guilt about that, for the record.
No, it's crazy, but honestly, so Clive, I think that is, and part of the reason why I think we have to talk about these things, and we have to say, I'm not going to travel for 3 weeks straight and stuff. And again, you asked me, why do I think people feel they can't be the moms they want to be and work? It's for those reasons, because there's people around them that will travel every single week, that will, you know, be so committed to work, and then it does make false trade-offs. And again, but I literally, what I think has been, rewarding for me, is I have decided not to do those things just like you have. And again, I'm very lucky for the company that I work for, but I have been able to be just as successful with putting those boundaries in place. And so then I think you go, now you can be happy. So I don't know.
It makes total sense. I mean, and I think there's also the theme of this discussion has been sort of the math doesn't work. When you look at Europe and how they think about maternity leave, and our conversation about the willingness to just sort of create boundaries and also be vocal about things without being you know disruptive, just being honest and open, is you playing a different math, which is a long-term math.
Yep.
So, companies are like, holy shit, we got to, we can't do a 6 month maternity leave. The math doesn't work. We need this employee back. But it's like, that's a very short term math. And you're not thinking about the long term health of a human and the mental state of a human and how much more productive and enduring they're going to be if you take a long term perspective, both as a company, but as an individual. You're going to have, I would suspect, if you choose, a longer, more productive, more effective for you and the company career, taking the approach you take.
Right. And
And so
and what
that's
I think
good for everyone, right?
it's good for exactly. And that's why I look at it, and I say, I think now, being in Europe, and this is why I think it is so important to learn from other cultures, is you just look at it and you say they have figured it out over here. And the reality is the companies are not all falling apart. So it is definitely doable. Um, and and what you do see is just women that are coming back, and they're much happier, and they're much more well adjusted, and then they can be better at their jobs. And so that, you want people that can be present and want to be at work versus people that they're physically there, but their mind is in a different place because you haven't given them the time that they need, um, to experience and to support their little children in this new part of their lives. So, yeah, I think I've now become a massive advocate for the extension of maternity leave for that reason.
And also, I mean, I think the thing that sits with me, and we're getting close to time,
Mm.
is how important it is. Because it's like, I we've talked about this, and it's not like there's some sort of massive, transformative, big gesture or substantive change that companies can make. It's actually the little things, right? The biggest little thing that everyone in the workplace, men and women, and particularly male leaders, can do to make a difference. And I'm hearing you say this, is just be open, and being open
Yeah.
to like a normal conversation about being a parent. And and
Clive, you like take the words out of my mouth, but I don't know. I was having a conversation with our global CEO, and he said, what is the biggest difference that you have felt over the last kind of 2 years? You've said you're the most engaged you've ever been. You've like to have high performance. And I said, I feel like I can openly be a mom. And I was like, and that is such a strange thing to say to somebody, but that's what it is. And I go, so if we could just all a little bit, and again, I really think COVID started this, but just be a little bit more comfortable with our full lives versus just our work life. I think what we'd see as leaders too, that people then they want to work for you, they want to work for those companies. That's what people are looking for. It's not just the perks of a company. It's the people that you work for and the quality of life that they're going to give you. And so I just again I go I just wanted to be able to be a mom. That was all I wanted, And so
how
yeah,
dare
it's
you?
been really nice.
Well, it's the as we talked before we started, is like the underlying theme of Unstuck is to have a real conversation, talk about real substantive and small but substantive impact things versus like bullshit made for TV. Like, you can do it, it's like you can be it's like, and when you get underneath the surface, you go, it's like there are just basic human normal stuff that humans can do to each other to create an environment where it's not like you got to do it all or you got to sacrifice one. It's do it different and be human.
Yep.
I mean, that for me is the takeaway here. And it's a powerful thing just hiding in plain sight
Yep.
is the best way I can say it. All right, my friend, I know being the power exec that you are, you got to hop on a train and go to a big meeting. I deeply appreciate you making time. I think this is a really important topic. And I thank you for sharing your perspective and being a great friend, a great exec, and all the best to the three boys and the four boys, the three little ones.
For voice. Well, no, and Clive, thank you so much for, again, giving me the platform to talk about this. Honestly, it's just because I want to help and try to make a difference, because you do step back and you go, I don't know, the next generation of women, like how can we help just make it a little bit better?
Yep. Well, you are, and I appreciate it. Katy Moran, thank you.
Bye, Clive.
Take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit screendragon.com to see our software in action.